Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. Life is a story we tell ourselves. Today we have with us Brian Starnes, and he's going to talk about cave diving, technical diving, and even a little bit about recreational diving. He's going to tell us a little bit about some of the adventures he's been on and why he got involved in cave diving in the first place. So welcome to the program, Brian.
Thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
So tell us, what motivated you to become a cave diver and get involved with caving in the first place?
So, before becoming a cave diver, I first had to become an open water diver. And that was a pretty cool happenstance. A friend of mine and I were traveling around Central America, and we were surfing on the West Coast in El Salvador, and he went up to Alaska to go fishing and left me by myself, and I didn't want to go home and didn't really know what to do, and I heard about this magical island called Utila, which is on the other side of Central America, and if we made it there, or it was just me at the time, I could try this thing called diving, and if I liked the diving, I could do it for a living. So I took the last couple of dollars I had in local currency called lempiras and went and did the open water course, and I liked it a lot. And I spent 2 or 3 years diving in Utila and becoming a better diver. And I got a little bit bored. I realized when I was guiding tours on the reef and I was thinking more about lunch and what I was going to cook than I was thinking about the people behind me that are counting on me to be paying attention, that I needed something a little bit more exciting.
So what was it that got you excited about cave diving? I mean, was it or just diving, period? Was there something that happened to you where you just had an epiphany and said, oh man, this is really cool, this is for me?
Well, the diving part, a lot of it was about lifestyle. When I was living on the small island in the Caribbean, and we would go diving every day, and I only needed to have 2 pairs of shorts. One was wet and one was dry, and 2 shirts, and life was comfortable, fun, and good. I thought, man, this is something I could do forever. On top of that, the diving itself is really, really interesting. You're in a different area, different rules, different sounds, different colors. It's really quite interesting.
I mean, you're in a different part of the earth. I mean, out here we're breathing air, we have trees, we have wildlife, and then you're submerged in the ocean. I mean, it must be like otherworldly. Would that be a right description?
Sure, except that it's still in our world. But it's definitely feels like a different plane of existence.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because you're not walking anymore. You're floating around the whole time.
Yeah. Understand. Well, you talked about the lifestyle a little bit. So what did you do psychologically? I mean, to make that transition. Hey, I love this lifestyle. I got 2 shorts, one wet, one dry. I'm out here in paradise and probably living one day to the next. How do you do that in your own mind? I mean, most people go to college and, I got to get a job and I got to earn money and, I'm going to have a family and all of this traditional stuff, but you took a different path, and that's what I'm really interested in.
Ever since I was a kid, my mom would be traveling and she'd take us on family vacations, and we went to cool places like Hawaii and then traditional places like Prague, and we went to visit all sorts of cool, interesting places in the world. And I remember even when we were in 5th grade, we had this trip to Hawaii planned, and the trip was planned for the last 2 weeks of school. My parents talked to the teachers, and I got to do all the schoolwork while we were on vacation. And I guess it started to sink home that, I could really do whatever I want in the world and do all these cool things in these cool places and still live a semi-traditional life. Mm-hmm. You just have to ask the right questions and have the right mindset.
Oh, we had a similar upbringing. My mother did the same thing. She took us everywhere that Sunset Magazine said you were supposed to travel. Every national park in the country, Ensenada, Mexico, anywhere we could afford to go. In her later years, unfortunately, she passed young, but she spent a lot of time in Hawaii. That was like her paradise. And I don't know, she must have gone to Hawaii 5 or 6 times. So what effect has the experience of diving had on your life personally, from where you were when you first started and where you happen to be now?
Well, I was really searching for a job that was outdoors doing a sports activity that I really liked. So I tried snowboarding and living in the mountains, and it was too cold and there was too much gear, and there were too many, it just wasn't quite right for me. And I tried surfing, but surfers are bums, and you have to have a guest house, and that's how you make money. I didn't want to be a hotelier. And I grew up skating, and skating doesn't have a whole lot of money, and you have to be in the city. And then when I found diving, I was like, I can live in a really cool place, I can do a cool activity, I can make enough money doing this activity that it can support my life. And then when I made the transition from open water diving into technical diving, it really started to take on this aspect of mastering the equipment and becoming a better diver and increasing my skill level, and then teaching people how to also be able to do this. And I've always been a pretty good teacher and enjoyed teaching people how to do things, so it kind of fell into place.
Right. So you mentioned the transition between open water diving and technical diving. Take us through briefly, what's the difference? I mean, isn't diving?
In general, yeah, diving's diving, and it should always be fun. But technical diving means that you're going to have some redundancies. It means generally that your consequences are going to be higher. There's two broad terms for technical diving, and one has to do with depth and one has to do with being in a cave. Right? They both have ceilings. A cave ceiling is not theoretical. There's an actual ceiling above you, so you can't surface and exit the water. And then with deeper diving, if you have decompression obligations, you have a theoretical ceiling. You can pass it, but you increase the chance of injuring yourself. So then technical diving, you have to carry with you these redundancies in equipment, and you plan, and you do much more planning so that you can establish your way to have a good time and to do the dive that you want to do, and then to also be safe.
Understand. So I've heard about this term in technical diving in terms of redundancies and safety. One of the great advances in diving is a rebreather. So tell us what a rebreather is in diving. You've already mentioned it once. What is that? What does it mean?
So very basically, anyone who's ever seen a scuba diver or has been scuba diving, you know that there's a tank with gas inside the tank, and then that's attached to a hose, attached to a big plastic thing you put in your mouth and you breathe from. When you inhale, you take gas from the tank, and when you exhale, you breathe into the environment all the gas, right? So every time you breathe in, you take gas from the tank, and every time you breathe out, you breathe that gas into the environment. So a rebreather, you still have tanks, you still have the hoses, you still have the pieces in your mouth, but you have another hose. So you breathe in from the tank, and when you breathe out, you breathe through another hose that takes that gas and puts it back into the system. So you have a closed loop.
So you don't see the bubbles coming up?
Don't see the bubbles coming out.
Like we've seen in all these movies about, diving. And now that you mentioned it, I've seen divers in many documentaries now, and I haven't seen bubbles, and it never occurred to me, where are the bubbles that you used to see?
So bubbles is one thing, and a lot of photographers like to use it because they can get close to different animals in the sea, which is really nice. Another interesting thing about the rebreather is that you're more efficient with your use of gas. You're not expelling all of the gas into the environment, you're recycling it into your system. You go through what's called a scrubber that gets rid of the excess carbon dioxide, and then you can also adjust the levels of oxygen so you can really have the best blend of gas for your entire dive. So it's a really cool tool.
So now I also, when I was doing some research before this interview, I learned about nitrox and the different mixtures of gas, and that, at one period nitrox, which I guess is 32% oxygen. Am I saying that right?
Nitrox just means nitrogen and oxygen.
So, but the combination or the concentrations are different than, because when you're breathing air, the concentration of oxygen is not at 32%.
Correct.
And so, but with nitrox, you have a different mixture, of nitrogen and oxygen, and the concentration of oxygen is higher. Is that correct?
Or it could be lower. So there's several gases that we use for breathing, but in air, as you said, we have oxygen and we have nitrogen. There's other trace gases, but for diving math and physiology, we usually don't consider them. So you have 21% oxygen, which leaves the rest as nitrogen, right? So that would be a normoxic mix, but it's still technically nitrox, right? But you can breathe enriched air nitrox, which is where you have a higher level of oxygen, right? So you're 32% or you're 30%. Talking a little bit about decompression, people do 50% or even 100% oxygen for decompression.
Interesting. Well, I also, when I was doing this research, found a lot of interesting anecdotes about diving, and one was when you were diving with air. Divers used to say something like, "Been there, done that." And if you were a really good diver and you were using higher concentrations of oxygen, you could say, "Been there, done that, remembered it." Because sometimes you would get in situations where you, because of the lower concentration of oxygen, your mind wasn't as sharp as it would be if you had higher concentrations of oxygen.
So it's not an oxygen.
Is that a myth?
What we're talking about right now is narcosis, which is actually a function of nitrogen. So one of the benefits of having a higher concentration oxygen mix is that you have lower nitrogen. Right? So yes, if you have more oxygen and less nitrogen, you don't get what they call narked at the same depth. But oxygen has depth limits and has consequences that can be severe if you go below your limit. So that's when you have new gases called trimix or heliox if you have the money. And this is when you add helium into the blend. So trimix would be helium, nitrogen, and oxygen. And then you find the balance so that you can have the right amount of oxygen for your blend and also the right amount of nitrogen so that you can have a clear head.
I see. So adding the helium lets you have sort of the same mixture concentration. I don't know if pressure is the right word of gases, but you can lower the nitrogen and replace it with helium.
You can also lower the oxygen.
Right.
So if you want to go do deeper dives, you can't have a normoxic blend. You need to have a hypoxic blend. Right. So in order to do that, you need to put something else in there. And right now we use helium.
That's really cool. I know some of my listeners will be interested in some of the science and physiology of diving as well. So I know in cave diving, for safety purposes there, and perhaps in open water diving too, there are a lot of redundancies that are put in place. So what's a redundancy? Do you go down with 3 tanks or
sometimes
4 tanks? Or
sometimes.
So how does that work?
So the third tank and the fourth tank are either going to be for decompression purposes or for longevity. If you want to spend much more time in a cave, in a shallow cave, you might just take 4 tanks of air. But if we're talking about redundancy, you want to have a minimum of 2 tanks. Each tank is going to have individual regulators. Right? That way, if anything happens to one breathing source, you still have another breathing source. Right? We also have 2 diving computers. You want to have 2 line cutters. So you set up your equipment so that if anything fails, you've got a backup. That's what we talk about when we talk about redundancies.
So, the thing that you hear most about, unfortunately, with diving, whether it's open water diving or cave diving, you hear the sensational stories about someone getting lost, someone dying. And of course, that's, true with a lot of sports, and news tends to sensationalize everything. But with the redundancies that we're talking about, how do people get in trouble diving nowadays, especially if they're cave diving? That's where you hear the horror stories.
Yeah, okay. So a couple of different things, but the big one is a lot of ego. You think, it's not going to happen to me. I'm good. I can push. And you go a little bit farther than your plan. You do things a little bit more dangerous, or a little bit more risky, and then sometimes you have a big problem.
Right. So it's really people taking chances, ignoring safety protocols that are already in place, and that ends up getting them into trouble.
Pushing your safety factor, I would say, is the biggest cause for accidents in the cave diving community. If you follow the rules that you learn in Cavern, Intro, and Full Cave courses, which are the 3 courses of cave diving for your basic cave diver, then you are going to be mitigating your risks to a point where you'll be relatively safe.
Right. Understand. Let's take a minute and talk about some of the exciting parts of and interesting parts of diving, especially for you personally. Have you made any unique discoveries or gotten down there and seen something that nobody else has seen, or made some discoveries that are like, wow, that is really cool?
I remember the first time that I was the first person to ever enter into a chamber in an underwater cave. And it is a really special sensation. I think everyone's got a little bit of explorer in their heart. But to actually have found a place where no one else has ever been before, and I'm still, the one I'm thinking of, I'm still probably the only person who's ever been there. There's still work to be done and the line can be pushed, but it's far enough back in a place that not a lot of people are going to go there. And it really just gives you this incredible sense of wonder and amazement in the world. You think, wow, what lucky decisions have I made to put me in this place right now to feel this way? It is spectacular.
I bet. So the environment in caves, I've understood from my career and the things I've been involved in with state and national parks, where we have many parks that are there because of caves and people coming to explore and have that experience that you just described of walking into a cavern, whether it's Carlsbad Caverns or whether it's Mammoth Caves or something like that. But the thing that seems to be really important is maintaining, the environment of a cave, because when you go into a chamber like you're talking about and you breathe, you're putting in air, bacteria, and so you suddenly change the environment of the cave. How much is that a consideration for you as a cave diver, personally, and do you talk to your the people that you train or take on dives about that aspect?
Absolutely. And all over the world, as cave divers and cave diving trainers, everywhere you go, there will be specific sites that are set for training, because training in general can be hazardous and harmful to the environment. So in Mexico, for example, there are only a couple of caves you're allowed to take students to, because it's going to eventually come with damage. Right? And they've already been damaged, some of these, to a point where they're like, okay, this is going to be our training site. In Sardinia, where I am, we have a different sort of cave. Our caves are not as decorated in the water portion, so you don't need to worry as much about damaging all the stalactites and stalagmites and the other forms. We also start in the sea. So we have this mountain, starts as a sea cave, and then we enter into a freshwater river that's coming from the other side of the mountain. So the environment that we're in at the beginning, where a lot of the training is happening, is an area that receives a lot of energy and damage just from the worldly processes. The waves come in. Sometimes you get 2-meter waves, 1.5-meter waves, and they come in with a lot of energy and a lot of force. So the space that we have in the beginning is actually really great for training, because it's an area that's already been beaten by the wonders of the world. But then, as your question is, when you're talking about going farther in and going into these deeper places, it's definitely a concern. And I know many people who found really beautiful things and won't tell anyone where it is. And that's just the way the game rolls.
No, I certainly understand that, and we in parks have worked with private landowners who have some of the most interesting and fantastic caves in the world, and decisions have been made many times to just seal those caves off and to never allow access and to not let the public know where they are, and I think those are important decisions.
Pisses a lot of people off too.
It does, indeed, piss a lot of people off. There was a cave that one of my colleagues, the parks director in Arizona, a private landowner, found, and it was years and years of controversy and people fighting over whether or not access was going to be allowed. Family members of the owner of the property said yes, because we can make money and we can charge people to come in, and this will be a great thing for us and a great income generator. Environmentalists said no, don't let anybody in the caves, and people in parks said, well, it's our business to allow the right kind of access, and this went on for years before they finally made a decision to put a metal door up there. I think I told you in our earlier discussions, and just seal the cave off and never let anybody in there. And I think sometimes that's done for good reason. A lot of diving, open water diving, and cave diving is about exploration. Have you been on any dives where you were like diving to look at a wreck or to look at some artifact that's under water that needed some sort of investigation? Have you ever participated in anything like that?
I have been on wreck dives, and I have been on please go to the bottom and search for this thing dives. And I've also been on exploration projects where we spend 2 weeks in the jungle, and the goal is to search out new caves and find new passages. And since that's my area of specialization, that's where I've spent most of the time. And it's something special. The last project I was on in Mexico with Robbie Schmittner and Toddy Valde. Robbie lives in Mexico, and Toddy's my boss at Protec Sardinia. We were on this 2-week cave expedition, exploring caves in the jungle. We found 22 new cave entrances. We laid 20 kilometers of new lines, something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it was just an incredible experience. Camping in the jungle, waking up, hiking to your hole, getting in the hole, and going to find something new.
Yeah, I can imagine. And those are the kinds of things that are life-changing and stay with you. You'll have a lot of stories to tell your grandkids. So what's the longest cave dive you've participated in? How far have you gone?
So the longest cave dive that I have done is actually been a multiple siphon dive. So in the caves we have in Sardinia, as I say, we start in the sea, and then you dive into the cave, and the cave is in a mountain, right? So the cave is going to go up and then down and then up and then down. So it's out of the water and it's dry, and then it's in the water and it's wet again, and it's out of the water and it's dry. And so the longest cave expedition that I've been on has been a couple of kilometers inside of Beltorrente, which is a cool trip that we offer to clients, Cave Camp, starting this next year.
Oh, cool.
It's about a kilometer dive. You gear up, you bring dry tubes, you bring all sorts of camping equipment and food, use DPVs, which you and I were talking about earlier.
Right.
And you go a kilometer into the cave, you get out of the water, you set up base camp, you're in this huge chamber, it's sandy bottom, beautiful, good air to breathe, you have a nice hearty meal, and then you start the cave expedition. Which is really, this is something that I've gotten into recently. I was open water diving and then cave diving, and then afterwards I actually got into dry caving because of the cave diving.
Right.
So Sardinia offers this absolutely amazing opportunity to do both.
Yeah, it's just absolutely awesome. So what's the most afraid you've ever been in a cave? If you have one of those super panic moments, oh, I'm not going to make it out of here?
No, I've never had a super panic moment, because part of the training is always, and we say this to people all the time, if you enter into panic, you will die. So you need to understand your elevated emotional state in advance and be able to make a decision and move forward. So we always say to people is stop, breathe, think, and then act. This way you can help sort of maintain your calm and make a good decision to help you move forward. Now, there have been several situations in which I have definitely felt pre-panic, as we call it, or have had a heightened emotional state. I remember one, I was diving with two of my friends. We were a group of three, and we dove maybe an hour. We were about an hour in, and it was a very complex cave, so lots of lefts and rights, and to avoid too many technical terms, we had a lot of navigation to do. And when it was time to turn around and go back, I had a disagreement with my friend onto which way was the way out.
Even though you had lines?
There was lines everywhere, there were markers everywhere. There was just one point where we marked something poorly, and there was a disagreement as to the direction of the exit.
Right.
And I was very firm in my belief, and I was like, this is it. This is the direction. I'm going this way. You can come or not. Which worked. He's like, okay, fine, we'll try this. But then we're leading, and I'm like, this doesn't look familiar. I don't see anything. Oh, no. I just made the power call, and now I'm going to be the reason we're all dead. Great. But then, fortunately, after a couple of maybe 45 seconds, I found a point of reference that I remembered, and from then on, we had easy navigation to exit.
Understand. Now, was this underwater? This was dry?
The whole thing was underwater.
Oh, my God.
So 1 hour underwater, everyone's having a great time. We talked about pushing our limits a little bit earlier. We have gas plans. I pushed the gas plan a little bit. On the way back, everything's still good. And then, boom, now there's a serious problem in navigation and direction and who's right.
Right. Oh, man. So what's next in the future for you? I know we've talked previously as we were preparing for this podcast, and you were talking about going back to school and getting some more sophisticated training. So in talking to you, you sound like this master diver, and you've done all of this training. So what's next? What's the next step, and what are you going to learn that you don't already know?
Well, one of the coolest things about cave diving and technical diving is there is so much to learn. So no matter how much you learn, there's still more to do. And there's new theories coming out about different things that you can do and change the way that we dive. I don't want to talk too much about it because there's still theories and they haven't been published, but it's cool to be in an atmosphere where you can have so much growth potential. So I just finished doing a lot of training to become a full cave instructor. So I go back to Sardinia, go back to Protec Sardinia, and I'll be doing a lot of Cavern and intro and some full cave courses over there with Toddy and our other instructor, Bruno. And so for my career as an instructor, this next year is going to be really wonderful because it's been a big step. And I'll be able to do a lot more courses coming up. It's going to be really nice. As a diver, I just finished my rebreather training on a side-mounted rebreather unit called the T-Reb, which we also have at the shop, and we do courses for this particular rebreather at the shop. And for me, it's time to move into the rebreather world and become really competent at the use of these machines. Back-mounted, side-mounted, front-mounted. Learn them all, master them. Eventually, I'll probably also teach on them.
So give me a hint, if you can, without being too revealing. I mean, I'm really interested in what you mentioned, that there's so much more to learn in other diving techniques and things that you could do before. And I realize, that they're theoretical and you don't want to get people in trouble, but give us a hint of what you're talking about, the kind of thing that might take you to the next level of diving.
All right. So what I was talking about earlier is not for me at this level. This is the things for the people that I'm working with who are on the next level up, who are working with doctors and scientists to try and set up for these really long, really deep dives to do them in a way where you can half your decompression time.
Yeah.
So by doing certain techniques, instead of spending 9 hours in decompression, you might be able to spend 4.5 hours in decompression, which, you think, I guess I'll have to sit here for 9 hours and just wait while I off gas. 9 hours is a long time.
It is.
4.5 hours is also a really long time. Personally, an hour to 90 minutes of decompression is really, really where I max out. But they build these really cool things called habitats.
Right.
So they build these flexible containers underwater that you can get inside and get dry and fill with gas so that you can, while underwater, while still acted on by pressure, you can do your decompression inside of a dry space. So those are pretty cool. We have one in Sardinia that was built. It was designed by one of our friends, and I got to help set it up and install it for the last project, which was really cool. And ours is mobile, so you can bring it out there. It was designed by my friend Ollie, and you set it up in about an hour, and it's ready to go. It's really cool. In America, they've done some really neat things where they send these tubes up to the top with antennas inside, so while you have your 7-hour decompression, you can watch Netflix.
Oh my God.
So Americans
have to have our Netflix.
Americans love that Netflix.
That is that's a great story. Well, Brian, this has absolutely been fantastic, and I know our listeners are going to be wowed by some of the things that you've said, especially some of the technical things you've talked about in diving, because a lot of people don't think about what goes into diving. And of course, it's a wonderful recreational sport. What would you recommend to, as we wrap this up, or say to someone who wants to get into diving, who's never done it before? How can they get started?
Well, first I'd say, can you swim? And if the answer is no, I'd say, learn how to swim, because it's a really valuable skill moving forward in your life. If you can swim, then I would say, awesome, now it's time to make the next move, and let's get into diving. And you can find a diving club almost anywhere in the world that can give you information on doing training where you are. I know they've got diving clubs in the U.S., they've got them in the U.K., they got them in South Africa, they got them in Italy, they got diving clubs everywhere. There's also big places in the world. One of the biggest places in the world to get open water certified is Koh Tao in Thailand, for example. Utila in Honduras. Those places are really fun to go to, and the level of instruction is usually pretty good because there's so much practice, so much work. Or if you really want to work super hard and become an excellent open water diver, come visit us at Protec Sardinia,
Right.
Sardinia, Italy, Calagonone.
Right.
We'll really put you to work.
So if a person wants to get certified, you talked about swimming. So what are the things you have to do? Like we were talking earlier, so swim 200 meters, that's a minimum, I assume.
Yeah, so every organization is going to have different standards, right? So the watermanship or the watership skills that you need to be able to do for most organizations is float for 10 minutes and swim for 200 meters. That's just before you start diving. The level 1 course of diving is, how does this equipment work? How do I put it on my body? How do I work in the water? And then also, what are some safety concerns and how do I mitigate the risk? So if you choose a place to do your course and you go do your coursework, you do a little bit of theory, so you understand theoretically what's going on in your body and in the water. And then you'll practice in confined water, which is defined as water deep enough to stand. And then you learn the equipment, you learn the techniques, the safety stuff. Afterwards, you go and start doing some dives in water too deep in which to stand. Then you can move, you're in the sea or a quarry or the lake. And this is when you get to really experience the water and start to figure out how your body works, how your lungs operate underwater, right? How you move. Do you need to use your hands anymore? Nah, you're only using your feet.
Your feet, right.
Yeah.
So what's the adaptability for most people in breathing? I mean, sometimes I will hold my nose and breathe through my mouth, and it's like weird. Even though I'm breathing and I'm fine and I'm taking in air, it's like, man, this like feels different. So what's the process of that adjustment and feeling, breathing through this device and breathing through your mouth and not through your nose, because there seems to be this reflex that you still want to breathe through your nose.
It's different for everybody. Hey, some people pick it up right away, and some people need a little bit of practice. But you do need to be able to disassociate mouth breathing from nose breathing, and then just breathe with the mouth. That being said, you're also wearing a mask, and the mask is also going to cover your nose.
Right.
So the rubber skirt's going to have a good seal around your nose. So even if you do try and breathe through your nose, you won't be able to pull it in because there's no air there.
You can't. Yeah. Awesome.
But it is pretty funny. It never occurred to me until I started teaching that people would not be able to just breathe through the mouth.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think everyone's
Did you pick
swimming.
it up pretty easily?
Yeah, sure. As a swimmer as well, when you're swimming and let's say you're doing this overhand stroke and you need to breathe, you turn your head out and you breathe you breathe in through your mouth. You don't use your nose because then
That's true.
it's more dangerous.
I never thought about that. I mean, I learned to swim. I mean, I must have been 6 or 7 or maybe even younger. And I remember being in the pool and they made us hold on to the edge. First thing the lady says, learn how to put your ear in the water. And I'm like, put my ear in the water? What's she talking about? And then, we did these breathe, blow exercises. We must have done it for like a half hour or so just to get us to understand that we're going to be breathing through our mouth. And now when I swim, I mean, I would never occur to me to try to breathe through my nose. And so it's probably going to be the same if I take one of your certifications and learn how to dive.
Absolutely.
That'll be cool. That's a bucket list thing for this 70-year-old podcaster. Brian, thank you very much for joining us. This was just absolutely awesome. And I know our listeners are really going to enjoy it. Happy diving.
Great, man. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Wow, that was awesome. Now I have to add getting my diving certification to my bucket list. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves. Clay Phillips will return on our next episode to share with us his experience of playing 50 rounds of golf in all 50 U.S. states in just 50 days. Later episodes will explore artificial intelligence, machine learning, and we'll take a trip to the coast of Ecuador to learn about the preservation of sea turtles. In the meantime, stay safe, share happiness, and remember, never stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing.